Oh, good. Welcome, everyone. We are giving folks a minute or two to get joined and connected to audio, and we'll get started in just a moment.
All right, we're going to get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is my favorite time of the year because if we're having a pre-conference webinar, that means our conference itself is actually right around the corner. So we're excited to offer this first of our three sessions here. This one is with Andrew Campbell, and it's Taking Back What Abuse Took, Helping Survivors Heal. I'm Blake Cush. I'm the Training and Outreach Unit Chief here at OVS. And on your screen, you can see our Director, B. Hansen, is also with us today, and she's going to offer some opening remarks for us shortly. In the meantime, though, I'm going to cover just a little webinar housekeeping. Both the Q&A and chat feature have been enabled for today's webinar. Just note that Andrew is likely to reserve time specifically for answering questions towards the end of the presentation. But if they come up throughout, you're welcome to use those chat. We'll be and the Q&A feature will be on to help monitor. But with a webinar this size and this many attendees, they might not get to all of them, but we'll do our best to make sure we can try and keep your questions answered when and where possible. Slides from today's webinar have also been made available. Rachel posted a link in the chat. We'll also send them to you after today's event. The webinar is also being recorded. A link to that as well will be shared via post-webinar email that gets sent out. And they also, in case you're ever interested too, that all of our webinars, if recorded, are also published on our YouTube channel. And you can easily find them just by searching through the videos that are on there. And then finally, as you exit today's webinar, you'll be directed to a evaluation survey for today's presentation. Please take a couple minutes to give us feedback. I've said this before, it's only like 10 or 11 questions. It can be done in a couple minutes. And that is incredibly valuable for us. And it helps all of us, and as the conference organizers and the logistics coordinators, as well as the presenters, to improve future training offerings. Andrew is coming back for our actual in-person conference too. So if there's some feedback that is valuable for him, he may be even able to incorporate it into his presentation he's going to do in a couple weeks. So that's our housekeeping. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Director B. Hansen.
Thanks, Blake, and thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Andrew. I'm so excited that you're all here. That we've kicked off the conference season. So this is the first of three virtual sessions that are being held as part of the conference. And check out our website so you can join the other two as well. You know, we thought a lot about what our conference theme should be this year, and connection really came out as a critical thing for all of us. And so it's the power of connection, strengthening services, supporting survivors. And connection really, it's more than what we do. It's really who we are. We are the connectors for victims and survivors of violence. And so very, very excited about this the theme this year. And we want to offer sessions like this one with Andrew and others, both for people who are going to be joining us at the conference in Albany, but also for professional development for folks who might not be able to join us in person. And if you can't join us in person this time, please join us next time we have a conference in 2 years. I'm super pleased to welcome Andrew Campbell from the Campbell Research and Consulting as our presenter today. Andrew is an expert on family violence and the risks of harm for adults, children, and animals residing in homes where people are violent. Andrew has a master's degree in public health. He's given over 200 family violence presentations at conferences and trainings all across the United States and around the world. His many publications have been cited in more than 1,600 international academic papers and research studies. And his second book, which just came out last year, is called Taking Back What Abuse Took, a public health-based approach to healing from abuse. We had the opportunity to work with Andrew he was one of our speakers at our 2024 Seeking Solutions Summit, and we're really thrilled to have him back. And as Blake mentioned too, we're super extra lucky that he's going to be at our conference in Albany as well. So you're in great hands with Andrew, and I'm glad you're all here. And I hope that I can meet some of you in person. Please come and say hi if you don't know me already at the conference. So I'll hand it over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea, and thank you to all of you for the opportunity to gather with you today. I wish we were in person, but as Bea said, there will be an opportunity to be in person here very soon at the conference. And I still appreciate this opportunity today to gather virtually. I'll get a little bit more into my work and some of the things I look at. But just as a brief intro, I present often to groups all across the country. And more recently, virtually around the globe on topics related to family violence. And every year I try to write at least 2 or 3 new talks. I think I have about 23 different presentations I routinely give, which is why I get to present so often. I have so many different things that I talk about. But the last thing I ever want to do is get comfortable in my work. It's something that I think is important for me is I don't want to just get comfortable with giving a few talks. I want to keep pushing myself to keep learning. We certainly know that perpetrators are continuing to evolve their methods, and my mindset is if we're not continuing to learn, we're falling behind. And so this is one of the newer talks that I've just have recently developed. I just started doing it for the first time at the end of last year. And so leading up to today's talk, I was still wrestling with it, still changing things around. So the slides are available, but you'll notice some differences. I never give the same talk twice. I always want to be making sure that I'm giving it up to date and changing it. Again, I think it makes me speak better when I'm not super comfortable even with some of my own slides because I haven't presented them before. So you'll see some slight variation possibly in the ordering of slides today. If there are any slides that made it into this final deck that aren't in the original slide deck I shared, I'll make sure to send those as well. But today's topic is an important one. It's about empowering survivors to heal. Obviously, ideally, we don't want people experiencing abuse, but the reality is for many of us who work in this field and in these areas, by the time we make contact with these individuals, they've already experienced that abuse and harm. So often in my head, I'm thinking, well, again, we wish they hadn't experienced it, but if they have, ideally, we want to help them heal because I believe it's the best way to ensure cycles aren't continued. And it's the best way to ensure a better and improved health outcome for them in the future. So again, I appreciate this opportunity, and we're going to dig in to this topic today. Get this and make sure there we go. I did want to share just a quick warning or just reminder. Again, I don't intentionally put anything in presentations that could be activating to others, but just because of the content, just again, dealing and talking about abuse, we know that many people who work in this field may have experiences themselves of experiencing these things. So if you do experience anything like that, if anything does cause any of those types of things, again, encourage you to step away, to take care of yourself. Something I always try to say in my talks and as a reminder is, we'll never be able to best help others if we're not first taking care of ourselves. So certainly, if you need to take a moment, something causes you to need to do that, please do so. Step away. Like I said, the slides are available, and I'll make sure the updated slide deck is available as well. One of the things again, in person, I like to make things a little more conversational. When we're in this format of being kind of a webinar format, and I already know, so this talk in its full length is around anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. I've given it as a keynote address at conferences that's been closer to 2 hours. I've also done it as a part of a full day training that lasted 3 hours. So we certainly won't run out of content today. So one of the ways that I ensure that I'm able to get through as much as I can is I usually save questions that or allow time for questions at the very end, which is what Blake mentioned and what we'll do today. But I'll have you think about this. I'll just ask this question and have you think about it as I'm talking. What does healing from abuse look like? Again, like I said, ideally, the families and people we work with, we don't want them to experience abuse, but if they have experienced it, we want it to stop, and we want to ensure that they heal. We often say it, I think we often think it, but what do we really mean? What is healing from abuse? I have a background, again, my master's is in public health. I've helped and assisted in research projects. I've also published research studies as first author and lead researcher. a very research minded approach to a lot of this work. And so one of the things that I think about when I think about healing, like I do other factors and things in this field, is, well, how do we quantify healing? And healing is a tough thing to quantify. A lot of times it can almost feel a little bit abstract. The idea of being, well, how does someone emotionally heal from harm? How do we measure that? Again, if they're suffering physical injury and the abuse harm is a physical injury, like a broken arm or broken leg, obviously we know when that leg is healed, when that arm is healed, and we could say, well, that injury has been healed. But again, there's often so much depth to the emotional hurt and harm that accompanies abuse. I think more so, again, when it's family violence, because you're being hurt and harmed by someone above others that you should be able to trust. And these are often deep hurts, and that harm often lingers long after the abuse even stops. How do we measure healing? And is it possible to do so? One of the ways that I've started to think of healing, again, just bringing my public health background into the picture, is sometimes I think measuring healing as behavior change is sometimes a way that can help us more kind of come up with a concrete idea of healing, and allow us to better quantify what that looks like. And I'll get into what I mean by that as I get into today's presentation. The reality is abuse brings harm, but it also brings behavior change. It changes the way we act, it changes the way we perceive things. And so part of healing is correcting those behavior changes, changing them back into healthier behaviors, and changing our perceptions back into healthier perceptions. So again, it kind of gives us a way to measure healing, I think, sometimes when we think of at least the components of it that are related to behavior and perception change. So I'll focus on some of those pieces today. Again, also allows me to bring in that public health perspective, like I said, which is where my education is largely focused and centered. As was shared by B, I have published a couple different books on issues related to family violence. You see my first book there, Not Without My Pet. I'm talking about the importance of pets to victims of domestic violence. I have plans for 9 more books that I have laid out. I'm turning a lot of my full day presentations into books. And so I have plans to write several more, and I'm just kind of getting started into that process. As I said, I speak often on topics related to family violence. Last year, I gave 65 presentations. This year, I think it will probably be pretty close to about the same amount. Usually in a calendar year, I'll be presenting in anywhere from 20 to 30 different US states. Things are kind of slow during the summer, which is nice because I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. So I got to spend a lot of the summer with them while they're out of school. But right here, I think next week, I start hitting the road again. I'll be in Dallas next week, and I'll be joining you, hopefully many of you in Albany later on next month. And then things really pick up from there. So I get out, I speak a lot, I write a lot. This is my most recent book, and again, the subject matter in this book is a lot of what I'm pulling from for today's presentation. You'll notice the book is orange. My 8-year-old, he just recently turned 8, but my son liked the first book I wrote. It had that dog on the front, but he said, Dad, orange is my favorite color, so why haven't you written an orange book? And so that seemed like as good a reason as any to make a book orange. And so my second book was published with an orange cover, and that made him very happy. Now, it did cause some issues with my 5-year-old daughter. My daughter said, well, Dad, blue's my favorite color, so why haven't you written a blue book? So the third book I'm working on, and I know for sure it will be blue. I know I promised my daughter blue, and I will deliver, but I have a few more words to fill. But again, you see that book there, that's why it's orange, and then there'll be a blue book that I'll be releasing here probably next year by the time that one's out. Again, this book is what we'll pull a lot of today's content from. If you have interest in it, you can find it on Amazon through my website also, which I'll share at the end. I provide links to get to that if you want to learn more about some of the things we'll touch on today. Here lately in my work, as it's continued really to evolve and advance in varying directions, I've really started to adopt more this stream model when I think about how individuals are impacted and affected by trauma and harm. Obviously, we're going to talk mostly today about helping them heal from it, but I wanted to spend at least a few slides talking about some of these processes and where they begin and where they start, at least the way my mind sees them and the way I think about these types of things. So I use often this idea of a stream, and what I often say is, well, when things start bad, when we have what I call faulty foundations, we are heading toward a bad outcome. My most recent study, which will actually be part of the main theme of that blue book, the third book I'm writing now. My most recent study, I'm looking at 68 U.S. school shooters. I'm looking at deep dives on the behavioral, social histories of these shooters. I'm looking at do they have histories of abuse? Do they live in homes where domestic violence occurs? I'm looking at all these different things. Again, having a bad start doesn't justify this bad outcome. It doesn't make it okay. But when we look at these types of bad outcomes as the end result of a process, I think it gives us better hope and better opportunity to prevent. But as I've been doing that study and others, I've just really have pulled a lot from thinking of things in this way. Bad starts flow toward bad outcomes. Doesn't mean the outcome is going to happen, that it's going to be bad, but some sort of intervention is often necessary to keep that from happening. When we think of bad outcomes, some of the ones I most commonly study are early death and violent outcomes. Again, two very negative outcomes that we don't want individuals who experience abuse to see. But unfortunately, the reality is without intervention, they are often flowing in that direction. When I think of a violent outcome, again, a bad start flowing toward a violent outcome, I see it going both ways. We see individuals who have bad starts in life, who had difficulty, experience abuse in early childhood, grow up to become an abuser or a perpetrator of violence. We also know that individuals who grow up in a home and experience hurt and harm early in life are at greater risk to grow up and continue to experience hurt and harm as a victim in adult relationships. So whether it's as the victim of violence or the perpetrator of violence, again, I often say it's what's in the chute, it's what's the most likely outcome. When things start bad, they are flowing toward bad outcomes in the absence of effective intervention. Like I said earlier, we'd like to wipe out that faulty foundation and ensure no one experiences abuse and harm early or later in life. But if individuals have already experienced those things, we have to work to help them to heal. We have to get them out of this stream, because without that, in the absence of that help and that aid, they are flowing toward more hurt, more harm, and more pain. That's always what's going to be the most likely outcome in the absence of intervening effectively. When I talk about faulty foundations and bad starts, I often make sure that it's clear and differentiate that they can come from two places. Bad starts can come from within or without. When I'm talking about a bad start or hurt or harm that comes from within, I'm thinking more often of mental health issues. I will add this, in my study of community violence perpetrators, we know that individuals who have more of the extreme end mental health issues are actually more likely to be victims than perpetrators of community violence. But we certainly know that some individuals are born with a predisposition to mental health issues and illness, and certainly that can cause a lot of issues and difficulty as well. A lot of my work, I focus on this other side, and that is the without side, individuals who are experiencing harm from without. Often other people, whether it's acts of commission or omission, other people who are inflicting harm, inflicting abuse, and causing this bad start. The other thing I like to add is these aren't always clearly demarcated groups. Sometimes the without harm causes within harm. In fact, often it does. So you're hurt and you're harmed by a parent, by a partner, and that creates some of these internal issues, depression, anxiety, and some of these other even difficulty or thoughts of suicide and things such as that. So often there's some interplay here, but again, faulty foundations, bad starts, these bad experiences can come from within, from without. Often it's kind of a mixture of both, where we see both of these types of things occurring. The reality is individuals who have bad starts or who experiencing harm or experience harm in life in forms of abuse and trauma and other things such as that, for many of them, it's something that's kind of been passed on to them by a previous generation. Individuals grow up in a hurtful environment, an abusive environment. They experience abuse. They grow up, they never work to heal. They never break the cycle. They go on and then have children who are in that same type of home environment. So these vicious cycles of generational abuse that we know, unfortunately, many families experience. And again, many times we see this harm being passed on. Like I said, healing is what breaks that cycle. It breaks that process. It better ensures that that harm is not passed on to the next generation. But in the absence of it, again, the most likely outcome is that individuals are going to continue to experience these things and just continue to pass them on to future generations. When we think how harm can be passed on, again, we're looking first at why, or what I'm talking about now is why healing is important, because these are the types of outcomes that most commonly occur when victims aren't able to heal from the abuse that they're experiencing. But one way it's passed on is kind of a clear and obvious way. in this graphic or image, we have an individual growing up in a home where they're experiencing physical abuse. They then grow up to be the one committing the acts of physical abuse. Kind of I guess an obvious way that abuse and cycles and harm is continued. Individuals experience abuse, they never heal from that. They grow up then to become the perpetrator of violence and abuse. Doesn't always go this way. We know that many individuals experience hurt and harm in relationships and don't go on to become an abuser. Many kids live in a home where they experience a significant abuse, and they say, I would never do that to my own children. They are determined not to become the abuser. But we do know that there are times when, again, individuals experience abuse, are not able to heal from it. They go on to become the one committing these same types of acts of abuse. Another way that abusive harm and trauma can be passed on to future generations in the absence of healing, again, is maybe not as obvious as just continuing in the same acts. But what I think of is that I think this image kind of from obviously a popular movie that I think kind of helps visualize what I think of when I think of this way, is we have an individual who grows up in an abusive home environment. And they survive they survive the abuse. They go on, and maybe they're experiencing this as abuse as a child. They go on to be an adult who has children themselves. And while they aren't committing the same acts of abuse that they experienced, they've never healed from that abuse. The emotional trauma, the emotional harm, the emotional hurt that they experienced as a child is still with them. And what it will often do is manifest itself in different ways. And so while they may not be committing the same acts of physical abuse against their children that they experienced, they may be committing acts of emotional neglect and emotionally harming them as they continue to struggle with that trauma, that hurt, and that harm that they themselves experienced as a child. Again, one of the more subtle ways that abuse is continued, individuals, again, not committing the same acts that they experienced, but never healing from the harm they experienced, going on to harm their children in other ways because there is this residual effect of the abuse that lingers and stays with them into their adult years as well. One last way I'll look at in terms of thinking of how cycles and how abuse is passed on when victims of abuse aren't able to heal from it. Again, is another subtle way that it's passed on. But the reality is for kids or adults that are living in abusive relationships, one of the things that they will learn while in this relationship or experiencing these types of things is that their needs and their wants matter little. If individuals are living in an abusive home environment, these environments are often centered around the needs and the wants of the abuser, and there's often little time, energy, or resources for anyone else's wants or needs. This is particularly true of emotional abusers that can tend to kind of take over these home environments. Kids live in these environments and they continually see their needs unmet. Over time, living in that and continually seeing that your needs are being left unmet, again, by the people you should most be able to trust to meet those needs. If you live in that, if you see this for long enough, you start to accept the idea or believe the lie that your needs don't matter. You see them continually being unmet, and you just think, well, my needs aren't being met because I don't matter. What I need doesn't matter. The problem is, and there's many problems with that, but individuals who live in that type of environment, particularly as children, grow up to become adults who still don't believe their needs matter. They still place little or minimal concern, minimal importance on their own needs, on their own wants, on what's important to them. And while we think of that and we think, well, that may, how is that putting them at risk for passing harm on to the next generation? The reality is when individuals don't place importance on their needs or have learned to undervalue their needs, they become prime targets for perpetrators of abuse. I kind of have the idea of needs of the perp and needs of the victim here as shipping speeds. When we think about ordering things, we order often in my household on Amazon or other types of delivery agencies, and there's always different shipping speeds that you can select from. Again, when we think of the needs of the perpetrator in these homes, it's often immediate, needs to be fulfilled immediately, particularly when we're thinking about emotionally abusive perpetrators in these home environments. While the needs of the victim, again, may never be met. There's minimal importance placed on their needs. When you're a child and you grow up in a home and you learn that your needs don't matter, you become an adult who can exist in a scenario such as this. like I said, you become a prime target for perpetrators of abuse. They are looking for individuals who have low self-esteem, who undervalue their own needs and wants. And when they're in these types of situations, again, it almost becomes what they've expected anyway. And so while it's completely not okay, it's completely unreasonable and unfair, they can exist in these types of situations because it's what they've always known. Well, of course, my needs aren't going to be met because they never have been. Again, when individuals aren't able to heal from the abuse and fix that broken perception, when they aren't able to see their value and understand they have worth and that their needs do matter, they can become prime targets for abusers. It's just a heartbreaking reality and pathway for many of these victims is they themselves grew up in a harmful environment, and now they're older, they're an adult, they have their own kids, and while they're not inflicting harm on these kids, they're in a home environment now where their kids are being harmed in the same way they were as a child. Again, speaks to the importance of in all these different ways ensuring victims heal so they don't pass on the abuse and harm in these varying ways that we see that occurring. Again, bad starts flow to bad finishes, bad outcomes. We're going to focus on the outside of the stream today, which is an area I like to focus on. It's the area of healing, of hope, and that's where we're going to focus today for the rest of our time together. Let me check in on time. I'm going to speak probably for about 45 minutes or so, and I'll try to allow at least maybe 50. I'll try to at least allow 10 minutes for questions. Like I said, I know I won't get through all my content, but I'm going to get through as much as I can. Like I said, we're focusing outside the stream. And I'll share this too. When we think about how do we get individuals out of these streams, it's going to be very hard for them to get out of this on their own. They're almost always going to need help to find the healing that is outside this stream. Not to say that some can't and some won't be able to find a way to heal on their own, but I think it's very rare to find someone who can at least who has found healing that can at least identify one person that they feel was instrumental in helping them or at least pointing them in the right direction to help them find this healing. It's one of the main differences when I think of individuals. Like I said, I'm studying school shooters right now. I'll be talking more about them when I'm there in person in Albany here in a couple weeks, or in the mid or end of August there. But one of the things that differentiate those that go on to heal and those who don't find healing, and certainly perpetrators of mass violence, I believe are often individuals who have experienced these bad starts, experienced harm, and not healed. But one of the differences among that subset and those who heal is the subset that goes on to commit these acts of mass violence often don't seem to have a single person that they really feel is in their corner. There's that complete absence of feeling there's any hope or any opportunity to change their circumstances. They become very convinced that the hurt and harm that they're living in today is going to be the hurt and harm of tomorrow and every day that follows. They lose hope and they commit these acts of violence. Again, we don't want that for them. We don't want them having the bad start. We want to get them out of the stream. We want them to help them find healing so they don't go on to hurt themselves and hurt others in the future. When we think about healing from abuse, it would be awesome if it was just a simple choice. Do individuals want to heal? Do they not? But the reality is while I'm going to focus on kind of simple concepts today, and again, that's intentional. When I talk about behavior change, as I said earlier, it allows us to really tap into the public health literature. And when we think about behavior change in public health literature, there are certainly some key concepts, key characteristics of successful methods and programs that help in changing those things. So again, that's why I'm going to pull from that today. But while the concept seems simple, the process is anything but. For these individuals, the road to healing is often a long journey, and it's not an easy one. I'll share this too. The healing journey is always unfair. Victims don't ask to be abused. It's not something they choose. And healing is work created by the perpetrator that is always going to be unfair. It is an extra unfairness to abuse victimization that if you've experienced abuse and you determine you don't want to risk sharing that or spreading it to future generations, you have to put in the work to heal. Again, it is an unfair journey. It was the abuse was certainly not something the victim chose. It is work added to the victim by the perpetrator through their actions. I think it's worthwhile that victims endeavor in doing this work, but again, it's an unfair process, and it's certainly not an easy journey. I want to make sure that's clear. I'm going to share simple concepts, but the road to heal is difficult, and again, individuals are going to need support throughout this process. It truly is a process, just as I said. Healing from abuse again is not just a simple decision. It can start with a single decision, an individual saying, "Hey, the hurt and harm that I've experienced, not only am I not going to pass on, but I want to make sure I work to heal from it to best ensure that I don't pass it on." So again, not just passing it on by committing the same acts, but ensuring that the residual harm is also gone to the best we're able to make sure we're not passing the abuse on in that way as well. Um, Abuse is a process for most. Again, it's often particularly those who experience chronic abuse. It is a systematic breakdown, a systematic, often a series of events, a series of actions that over time just continually wear down the victim. When I think of different forms of abuse, I often say, physical abuse is something that hurts the individual from the outside in, meaning that they start with that physical harm that's on the outside, but physical harm always carries emotional harm too. Again, when it's someone you should be able to trust and count on is physically hurting you, you're not only going to feel it on the outside in the physical sense, you're also going to feel it on the inside in the emotional sense. But physical abuse is someone that wears someone or that hurts and harms someone from the outside in, and emotional abuse wears them down from the inside out. Those emotional harms, while they don't leave bruising on the outside, that emotional harm, that emotional injury will linger and will eventually create physiologically observable symptoms as well. Inside out, outside in, a lot of times it goes both directions. Individuals are living in these abusive, harmful environments, and over time they are wearing down. Abuse, again, is often a process of systematically wearing victims down. I think it's important to view it that way to help us recognize, well, healing is going the other direction. It's taking the individual that's hurting, that's hurt, that's broken down, breathing life back into them, allowing them to the best that we're able or working to restore them, to bring that health and hope back that abuse has taken from them. One of the things I think we sometimes get wrong, particularly when we're thinking about kids in these types of environments and how abuse and harm affects them. Again, same for adults as well. But I often work. I work with all disciplines, but probably most often with child welfare. But certainly all disciplines I work with in some capacity. But I think sometimes we get it wrong when we think of individuals who are in abusive or harmful relationships. We think of the hurt and harm they're experiencing as a series of peaks and valleys. Well, the one day where they were pushed down the stairs, or the one day where they had awful things spoken over them, certainly that was a traumatic day. That was a high stress day. But then nothing major happened for a week, and they kind of had this reprieve, and then harm happens again. But it's not like that. For most victims who are living in abusive relationships, the emotional harm isn't peaks and valleys. It's a constant stay in the peaks, because every day that nothing did happen, they still spent that whole day expecting that it would happen. I've learned to kind of describe it as individuals or victims live their life braced for impact. They are just constantly waiting for the next bad thing to happen. They have a lot of trouble ever believing that they're ever out of the woods. Even if things start to seem better or feel better, or they're heading in the right direction, they still in their mind are still often in this place where they are just waiting for what is going to be the next bad thing. The reality is kids who live their life and spend their childhoods this way, and unfortunately many of them do. And they may not, again, there's different ways they'll show it on the outside, but on the inside, they are living like this, braced for impact. If you're a child and you live your life braced for impact, outside of healing, outside of finding help to work through those types of things, or outside of ever finding safety so you can take a breath and so you can feel safe, you will become an adult who lives life the same way. Kids who don't feel safe and who remain braced, expecting more hurt and harm, become adults who live life the same way, just anticipating more hurt, more harm. They begin to accept this idea it's all they're ever going to know. And again, it speaks to the importance of helping them correct this perception. More than that, though, and I'll get into it here in this next bit. It's not just correcting the perception, but we have to make it a reality that they can relax, that they can take a breath, that they can feel safe, so that they can come from this brace for impact state. Again, that causes significant harm to all of our body's key systems. When we think about getting into the process for healing, and I know I'm going to throw a lot at you in a short period of time. That's generally how I handle presentations when I know I can't get through the whole topic. Most of the talks, like I said, I have about 23 now. Most of them I write now to be 4 to 6 hours, just because I rarely get asked to speak more than that. And I know I always have enough content. But then when I get into situations like today where I have to try to fit a 3-hour talk into 75 minutes, my goal, especially when it's in this format, I know it'll be recorded and you can view it later, is just to get as much to you as I can. So again, I appreciate your time and attention as I do that with the time we have left today. But I'll focus on different aspects of healing now and of the process in the time that we have left. I certainly think the process really starts with safety. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario where a victim of abuse can successfully heal from abuse while they're still living in abuse. Again, it seems like a simple concept, but it's particularly important when we think about children. We know that oftentimes decisions are made to ensure that families remain intact, and certainly, ideally, children would have two biological parents who take great care of them and who are safe and healthy influences on them. But the reality is sometimes we have to trade um, uh, uh, ideal for realistic. And sometimes it's just not possible. And so we leave kids in situations because we don't want to separate them from a biological parent. We leave them in a situation where they're continually being hurt by that biological parent. And when we do that, we take from them the opportunity to heal. It doesn't mean they can't find time to do it later, but again, we're just creating more and more work for them because the abuse, the longer it occurs and the more extreme and significant it is, again, healing is only going to be made more difficult. When individuals are living in abusive home environments, when abusers still have access to their victims, it is very hard for victims to fully heal. Doesn't mean they can't start working on it. Doesn't mean that they can't come up with healthier ways to cope and manage the abuse, which is important. But again, while you're in the abuse, while you're still experiencing the hurt and harm, it's very difficult for an individual to be able to heal from it. An example I share when I think of this particular concept, I talk about when I broke my foot. Now, it was 2 years ago. I wish it was a cool story, but it's not. I was running in place in my living room, watching Bluey with my kids, stepped on something wrong, and I broke my foot. Again, I realize not a cool story, but it's reality. It's what happened. At the time, I didn't know it was broken. I went to the doctor and said, "Hey, you know, I hurt my foot. Here's what happened." I think I left the Bluey part out, but you know, here's what happened. My foot is really sore. It's giving me a lot of pain, particularly at night. It's difficult to walk on. The physicians there, they sent me for an X-ray. They imaged my foot, came back and said, "Hey, there's no fracture. It's not broken." I talked about, well, should I wear a brace? Should I wear a boot? They said no. There's not really any evidence that would help at all. It's not broken. Just try to take it easy, and hopefully in some time it will heal. Well, it didn't heal. And it was about a month later, and I was really in a lot of pain by this point. I went back and I said, "Hey, can you X-ray it again? And now can you look at this part that's literally bulging that we can see on now outside my foot? We can see that the inside is not okay. Kind of like I talk about things going from the inside to the outside. Now we can visualize that something's not right. So they X-rayed my foot again, and they said, "Hey, since you've walked on this foot for the last month, you've aggravated the fracture to the point where now we can actually see it. Yes, your foot is broken. It is fractured. And the thing is if you'd been in a boot this whole last month, it probably would have healed by now." So a little frustrating to hear that, but it's always been a visual for me of individuals who are in abusive environments. Excuse me. It wasn't until my injury was correctly identified and properly treated that my foot could heal. In that whole month, I was continually re-injuring that fracture. There might have been days where it started to heal maybe a little bit because maybe I wasn't as active or there wasn't as much aggravation to the injury. But many days, the foot would just be refractured again. It was not properly treated or identified, and it was only continually causing more harm. Again, a visual that I often use when I'm thinking about individuals in these abusive environments. We have to get them to safety and do our best to keep them there to give them the chance to heal. When we keep kids, when we keep others in abusive and harmful relationships, we take that opportunity to fully heal from them and delay that process. Sometimes kids can get through these situations and grow up and have a chance to heal and take advantage of it, but it's not always that way. Many kids live in difficult situations and they never heal from it, and it's just passed on. Again, we have to treat it and identify it to give the opportunity for healing to occur. Excuse me. Once safe, and we get them to safety to the extent that we're able, again, it makes it possible for them to continue to work through the healing journey. This is one of the things that I talk about, and one of the areas that I angle when I'm talking with victims. And these are parents who are living in abusive environments, who have children. And, again, we know there are many reasons why it's difficult for victims of abuse, particularly parents who are victims of abuse, to leave these relationships. One of the big ones is children. They are afraid that particularly if the abuser is also a bio parent to the child, their concern is that if they end the relationship, if they leave the home, that the bio parent who's abusive will then continue to get access to the child, and now the safe parent will be unable to protect him. I know it's a common thing that I hear, and again, not something I ever want to diminish. Certainly, it's understandable why they would be feeling that way. But one of the things that I like to unfortunately, or I like to share it. It's an unfortunate truth, unfortunate reality, is abuse only tends to get worse. Outside of effective intervention, abuse is only going to occur more frequently and get worse. It doesn't just magically stop or disappear. So victims, parents who are in that situation, one of the things I have to remind them of is, however bad it is right now, it's only likely to be worse tomorrow. So however concerned you are for your child today, that concern will probably only grow tomorrow. Even those who are working hard and trying to protect them from abuse and harm, it's going to be hard to imagine that they'll ever fully be able to do so. That hurt and harm will get to them at some point. And while it will be scary when they separate and know that the bio parent likely will still get time, and now that they won't be able to be there to try to protect or mitigate that harm, the reality is that it creates a safe place. It gives kids at least one safe home, where they are getting that safe, healthy environment that's conducive to growth. And while it's not ideal, we'd like them to have one safe environment, rather than having one harmful and one safe. At least giving them one safe place does matter, and certainly can be instrumental, in allowing to at least get some of these concepts to healing to them. Now, again, whenever they go back to that, sorry, I've got something in my throat. Give me just a second here. Whenever they go into that unsafe home, again, they're likely to be hurt and harmed further. But at least having that safe place for them to land is important, and has been shown to mitigate harm, and again, can help at least get them on the path to find healing, once we're able to fully get them out of an abusive and harmful relationship. I also, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I could talk about it on this piece a lot longer, and we don't have a whole lot of time. But again, I share with parents, when you're in this situation, and we know many victims of abuse will choose to stay in that abuse for their kids. Again, even though it feels like maybe that they're mitigating some of the harm, while that adult themselves is drowning in the abuse, again, it's going to be very hard for them to be able to provide the level of care, and attention that their children so desperately need. While they themselves are still hurting, it's hard for them to do that. These adults need to be able to at least work toward a way to find separation from the abuse, to find a safe place from the abuse, so that they can get themselves to safety and work on healing themselves, and be that better example, for their children that their children so desperately need. We know, unfortunately, when caregivers are living in these abusive environments, and again, they haven't had the opportunity to heal from the abuse because they're still living in it, we can see them having difficulty in meeting the needs of their children. So even while they're in these home environments and they feel, and again, many of them, are doing all they can to mitigate that harm, again, it's certainly not an ideal scenario or situation, because the victimized parent, has had so much taken from them, that the reality is they may not have enough to give their kids. It may not be until they themselves find help, that they themselves find safety and healing, that they are best able to provide what their kids need. While they're living in abuse, it's more likely to play out this way. Caregiver doesn't have their needs met, and even though they try and they do all they can, they still can't meet the needs of their children. And we see that critical relationship start to break down. And it is such an important relationship, particularly for kids. It's very unlikely that they're going to form a strong bond or strong, healthy relationship with the abusive parent. It's the victimized parent that is the child's best chance, at seeing healthy behaviors and at having a healthy attachment to a parent. And again, victimized parents have to work to heal to best make sure they're able to provide that, for their children. We know that once they get to safety, they'll also struggle with going back. We know on average, victims of domestic violence, it takes them about 7.5 attempts to successfully get out of an abusive relationship. One of my newer presentations, I talked about writing a lot of new ones. every year, but one of my newest ones is talks about why it's so difficult, or talks about all the barriers to escaping abusive relationships. Again, it's not an easy process. I've learned to kind of think of abuse, particularly when we think about, in the sense that I'm describing it right now, when we think of a parent being abused or an adult being abused by a significant other. I think of abuse as being entanglement. Perpetrators are very good at tangling up their victims, and just layering the abuse and harm on them. They come at them in different angles and with different things, that makes it very difficult for victims to get out, and to untangle themselves. So sometimes I deal with groups who are working on trying to get victims to safety, and they're frustrated because they say, hey, I know it's important that victims get to safety, and I had them to safety, and they went right back in. It can be easy to feel discouraged by that, but what I always like to encourage disciplines with is a reminder that, again, it is a process to heal. And it's also often a process just to escape the abuse because of how entangled the victim likely is. And while they did go back, and again, I get why that would be frustrating. What happened, it wasn't that nothing happened there, but what you probably did is at least get rid of one of those layers of entanglement. And so again, it's not like, well, we tried to help them, they went right back in, we did no good. No, what you probably did is help them in the process, because again, it's a process, it's entanglement. It often takes time for them to get untangled to the point where they can escape. So again, never cut yourself short, or sell yourself short when your efforts result, or when you see a result of a victim going back. Again, you've helped them in that process, and while it will take many attempts, it's worth the effort, because again, it's once safe from the abuse and harm, that victims can better heal and put themselves in a better position to be there, not just for their own life, but for their kids as well. I'm going to skip a couple of these things just to keep us on time. Like I said, many of these topics I could just talk about for the rest of the afternoon, so I kind of have to keep myself moving there. Moving on to another key concept when we think about how are we empowering survivors of abuse to heal, is recognizing that these individuals are most certainly going to have distorted perceptions, wrong perceptions about themselves and about the world, about others, that we need to help them work through. Again, one of the more subtle ways that abuse impacts its victims, but it's significant in that it can cause a lifetime of difficulty in other types of relationships. Abuse lies to its victims every day. One of the lies that abuse tells a victim of abuse every day is that you have no value, you have no worth. I think it's true of kids, it's true of adults. When someone particularly that you should trust is causing you abuse and causing you harm, it's just something that they're going to hear. They're going to hear it, and it may start out as a whisper, but with each, as the abuse continues, as it increases in frequency, they begin to hear it louder and louder. Abuse lies in many ways, but it's probably one of the biggest lies, is that you have no value, you have no worth. Once they hear that again over time, it teaches them to think that their own needs, their own wants don't matter. It's something we definitely have to reverse that process when we're helping them to heal. We have to help them see that it's a lie, that abuse has been lying to them. And while no one, I mean, obviously in emotional abuse, sometimes those exact words will be spoken by the abuser. But even if they're not, it's the unspoken words in some of these actions sometimes that the victims will hear that, and it will become part of who they believe they are, their internalized perceptions of themselves. Yeah, I have no value, I have no worth. It's something we certainly have to reverse, that process, to turn them in that direction toward healing. I think of it too sometimes as kind of funhouse mirrors, like in a circus, or not a circus, but a fair or carnival. I guess maybe circuses, I've seen them before, I guess, or they would be there too. But we have all these different mirrors where individuals stand in front of them, and it just kind of distorts the perception in all different ways. Again, individuals who are living in abuse, who have gone through abusive relationships, are most certainly likely to come out of that, with distorted perceptions, of themselves, as well of others too. The reality is when individuals are living in abuse and they're experiencing abuse, particularly at the hands of someone they should trust, most of their other relationships are going to be affected as well. This can be true for adults in other ways than children. Adults, their work relationships, if they are employed or have a job, those relationships are going to be affected by the abuse they're experiencing, as well as their relationships with their peers, with their friends, with their family, with others in other community organizations. Again, when abuse and hurt and harm is being perpetrated by individuals that we should be able to trust, that hurt and that harm goes deep. And whether we realize it or not, it can literally affect our perceptions of other relationships as well. It's also true for children. I think, again, I'm looking at school shooters now, so it's a topic I talk often about because it's what I'll be studying for the rest of this afternoon as well, and what I study most days here recently. For many of these individuals who go on to commit these acts of violence and hurt and harm, who aren't able to heal before they commit these acts of violence, I think it's something that makes them feel separated from other kids. Most school shooters that I look at, many of them are bullied, but more than bullied, most of them are in a state of social isolation. Sometimes it's both. They're being bullied and they're socially isolated. But even more often than bullied, I find that these individuals are socially isolated. Sometimes it's because other kids don't want anything to do with them for whatever reason. They think they're strange. They want to be away from them. Sometimes it's the victims themselves that pull back and pull away from other kids. I think, again, it goes back to those distorted perceptions. And when individuals, kids or adults, are being hurt and harmed by those they should be able to count on, it impacts their ability to see their true value and worth. And it makes them feel that, well, if these other people, like, a parent, whoever's hurting them, doesn't think highly of me, I have nothing to offer them, then surely I have nothing to offer these other kids. It can create this social isolation that, again, we have to work to try to repair and fix when we're helping individuals who are experiencing these types of things. I think, again, just the way my mind works when I think of in my research and all the work that I do, I try to quantify as much as possible, bring in data, bring in statistics. I like measurables. And so one of the other ways I think that when we're thinking about how do we help individuals work to heal from abuse, one of the things we can also do is have them identify some of the things that was taken by the abuse. And the reality is sometimes abuse takes things that can't be given back. We know childhoods are taken by abuse. We know physical injuries can be permanent. We know that fatalities can occur. Obviously, there are some things that abuse takes that can't be taken back. But helping them recognize what they can take back can also be an important part of that healing journey. Also can be helpful when we're talking about improving their self-worth. Some of the attacks on their self-worth while they were in the abusive relationship could have been tied to some of the things that were taken from them. And helping to give those things back, or helping them to take those things back, can be very empowering for them and allow them to help work toward that better sense of self-worth. Again, identifying what pieces are missing. Abuse always takes. It changes behavior, but it also takes things as well. What's missing, and what things are we able to correct and fix. One of the ways that it takes, and again, this is kind of on the more subtle end, is I'll hear adults say that they were victims of abuse as a child, and so now they never want to have children themselves. They're afraid that they will just harm the children like they were hurt and harmed, and so they decide that I'm not going to be in a relationship, I'm not going to have children, because I would probably only hurt them like I was hurt. Now we want people, if they want to make that choice and choose not to have children or not to be in a relationship, we want them to be able to make that, but we don't want their past victimization to make it for them. Again, it's something abuse is taking from them. It's something that abuse in their past has determined for them that they can't have this today. When I think about healing, again, for victims, one of the things I think about is this. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. We have to acknowledge that these events occurred, that the harm that they experienced is real. It did happen. We don't just pretend it didn't happen. Trauma doesn't do well when it's buried. It never stays buried for long. It does not go well when we try to pave over it. So we have to admit it did happen. These things did occur. But how do we get these individuals to a place where that hurt and harm from their past is no longer taking from the good of their today? And this is one of the ways that it can potentially do that we have to ensure that we're working with these victims to make sure that it's not taking that decision from them. Again, if they don't want to have kids, if they don't want to be in a relationship, we support that as their own choice, but we don't want the abuse to be deciding that for them. It's one of the ways that abuse has taken from them that potentially we could give back and ensure that, hey, we want you to make that choice for yourself, not because the abuse is making it for you. We also know that abuse can take holidays and birthdays. I looked at domestic violence and partner abuse, and published it in many different studies, looked at it in different ways. But one of the ways I look at it is through police reports for domestic violence. A couple of the studies I've published, I've analyzed a large number of police reports for domestic violence. And one of the things I noted is an increase in reports on certain holidays. And those, there's a few different holidays where I noticed reports would go up, and one of the big ones was Christmas. In many communities across my state in Indiana, or across my state of Indiana, We see significant increases in reports of domestic violence on Christmas Day. I've also had that confirmed by individuals in my presentations that I've heard from or met with as I travel and speak on these topics. And what they describe is, yeah, they can remember just terrible memories on Christmas Day or on other holidays. And now, as they're an adult, it's kind of taking Christmas from them because now even though they no longer live in that home environment or that they aren't around that perpetrator for Christmas, they still, Christmas morning, Christmas trees, different things associated with Christmas bring back that traumatic harm, cause them to hate that holiday. The same is true about birthdays. I can think of many individuals who describe hating their birthday, and they think of hurt and harm that occurred on their birthday or on others' birthdays in their home, and it causes them to hate that, to dread it. And again, these are things that are being taken from victims still, and things that we can help them to try to take back. Again, even if it might seem little or it might seem small, but we don't want abuse to continue to take anything from these victims and survivors as we help them to heal. And so saying, well, how can we work to take Christmas back? How can we work to take your birthday back? How do we better ensure that these days aren't still being taken from you? Again, seems like a little thing, but it's a big thing for them because again, it allows them to have a goal, a tangible goal to say, well, what can we do differently to take these days back so that abuse doesn't continue to take these days from you? For some, it'll be educational opportunities or work employment opportunities that abuse has taken. And again, finding a way, well, how do we go back and say this was taken? And while we may not be able to find, a solution that's or the what was taken specifically, we may not be able to fix specifically. But in that same vein of thought or in that same line, how can we go back? What were your passions? What were your interests? What were you wanting to do before abuse took from you? And how do we address that and try to get back to that place where we can help you realize maybe some of the goals and dreams that abuse took from you? Again, can be an important part of the healing process as well. I don't have a whole lot of time to get into this, but anytime I talk about the educational piece and victims of abuse, I like to just remind of the importance of recognizing that while someone is living in an abusive relationship, while they are in abuse, it's very hard for them to perform academically. I think it's true of kids, it's true of adults too. This study, I think, has always been impactful or insightful to me in this area, because often when I think about kids in particular who experience abuse, long-term chronic emotional abuse, we think of them having what we often call cognitive delays, where they're behind their classmates, they don't do as well in school. This study, I think, is interesting because it says, don't think of it as a delay, but think of it as an adaptation. And again, I think it's true of kids. I think it's true of adults as well. When they're living in an abusive environment, their brain and the things they think and the things they do are going to be centered around their risk. They're going to be living in that braced for impact state, and they're going to be thinking on the day-to-day, what's my risk for today? How do I mitigate risk and harm today? If you think of you think of a school-age child who's sitting in the classroom and they aren't sure if their mom is still going to be alive when they get home from school, it's going to be very hard for them to focus on their schoolwork. They're not going to do well on their tests. They're more worried about their safety and the safety of those they care about and that they love. Once they get to safety, then they can actually focus on schoolwork and do better in these types of environments. I can think of many examples of this where individuals were struggling academically. We find that they are in an abusive relationship. We get them to safety. We allow them the opportunity to work toward healing, and suddenly they are able to perform better in school and academics again. Again, I think it's an important reminder. Kids, it's also a warning sign to be aware of. If kids historically, an individual has done well in academics, and suddenly we see a dramatic drop, it's worth looking into and trying to understand what's going on. Is it a new teacher that the child's just not responding to well? Or is there a lot of hurt and harm at home right now? And we're seeing a manifestation of the pain and the harm that they're experiencing because they're suffering academically. Again, we only have so much to give, and when we're having to use it for risk assessment in our own home, it's harder to perform well in the academic world and academic area. Like I said, sorry, you'll see me skip some things, but I'll make sure all these slides are available. In addition to thinking about the pieces that abuse takes and what's missing, It's also important to recognize that some of these things that have been taken will have been replaced with wrong pieces throughout the process. And so there will be other areas too where victims have tried to replace things. They've tried to mitigate harm, and they've made an unhealthy choice or are engaging in unhealthy behaviors. This is when a lot of that behavior change comes into play as well of the healing process. What I mean here is I'm looking at thinking about victims of abuse. Again, we know they're often in this extreme emotional distress, internal turmoil. They start to engage in unhealthy behaviors, just trying to find ways to cope with that stress. There's this emptiness, there's this hurt, there's this harm, and we understand why they're searching for ways to cope and manage it. But again, when we're thinking about healing, we have to identify the ways and the unhealthy coping mechanisms they may have adapted or adopted, and we want to help them change those as well. Because again, it's a residual effect of the abuse. When I think of some of these unhealthy behaviors, it can be binge eating, it can be abusing drugs or alcohol, it can be it can also be involved in unhealthy spending habits or other risky types of behaviors. Victims, again, we know many of them can get to a place where they feel so isolated that they're just trying to get by. They're just trying to survive to the next day. So once we get them out of that abusive relationship, part of the process of healing is identifying, well, what are the unhealthy behaviors that they have adopted to get through the abuse that we now want to make sure don't continue to harm them, that they're outside of this abusive relationship. Again, it's another way that the abuse continues to take from them, even outside of that relationship. If they're continuing to engage in these unhealthy behaviors, it could be a stress response that they learned even as a child. They watched their parents engage in unhealthy behaviors to cope with stress. They experienced abuse and stress. They took on these same behaviors. How do we ensure that we help them to heal from that and to get to a place where they don't need to or feel the need to engage in those behaviors, because we don't want their kids to then again be passing that baton and engaging in those same types of behaviors. I'll do just a couple of quick hitters here. I want to speak for about 15 more minutes probably. So I'll just do a couple of these concepts quickly, and then I'll focus in on one of the final pieces for the remainder of the time that I have. But routine consistency is important. Again, when I'm thinking about how do we empower victims to heal, I also look at individuals who I know didn't heal, who go on to commit these acts of violence, and I say, well, what did they not have? What did they say that they needed that they didn't have that was missing that might have helped them heal? And one of the big ones is this idea of consistency and routine. When you live in an abusive relationship, when you're in an abusive environment, it's chaos. It's the opposite of consistency, and routine. Again, is something that is not often possible. Again, particularly when we think of a significant or a high risk abuser in these home environments, victims. Children, particularly child victims, need consistency. Really, children, really, whether you're a victim or not, all children need consistency. It's an important piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about building strong mental health and making and strong emotional health. And they're not getting it in an abusive relationship, an abusive environment. You're not getting consistency and routine. These are really important pieces in the healing process. Not always possible, particularly again if the victim is a parent. We know sometimes planning with children can be difficult and things can happen that are unexpected, but to the extent that we're able, developing some sort of consistent routine with them is important and can certainly be important in their healing process. And that can look differently. We know some victims, excuse me, some victims describe, working out or walking or getting some sort of physical exercise as part of the routine that helps them recenter themselves. We also know individuals describe walking pets. I can think of some who describe it was this piece of the routine was the only thing sometimes that they were able to manage while they were trying to heal or they were working through the abuse and harm they experienced. One victim said to me, I knew I had to walk my dog, and so that was the only reason I got out of bed in the morning. If it hadn't been for my dog, I probably would have never gotten out of bed. But I knew my dog was counting on me, and that was part of my routine, that I was going to walk my dog every morning. And so, you know what, on the days when I didn't feel like doing anything else, I at least did that, and it gave me hope. I didn't feel, it helped me to see that I'm at least staying with the pieces and parts that I can. Again, having those consistencies and in the routine can be helpful for them. The reality is, though, again, is that things are going to occur. We know that individuals who experience abuse can certainly that suffer chronic abuse can certainly experience PTSD. post-traumatic stress disorder, and that different things can occur that take them back to that high stress moments. Even long after the abuse has stopped, where things can occur that they're not expecting that can activate those parts of the brain again and send them right back into that area. You may or may not be aware of the show Big Brother. This is not a commercial for it, but one of the phrases that I often say in the show is expect the unexpected. And it's, again, something, it's in part of this piece when we're helping victims try to plan, survivors, how to heal from abuse. There will be things that they can't control. We build consistency and routine as possible, but we also make sure we work with them on the understanding that things are going to happen that we can't really plan for. When I think about that, and again, obviously an odd picture there, I'm sure on the right, you're trying to think, well, how does this tie in? I promise it's going somewhere. I had one victim or survivor who came up to me after a presentation I had just given and said, you know, that particular talk, I was talking on this topic, but I was talking more about the importance of having a safe place. How kids, adults alike need at least one safe person, one safe place. And ideally there's more than one, but we always need at least one. And she said, you know, yeah, when I'm home and when I'm in my house or whatever, I have a safe place, and I know that things are going to happen that I can't control. And I'm just thinking, well, if I can get to that safe place, that's part of my routine. I get there, I'm able to let it go. But what do I do when I'm traveling? She said, you know, this was a big conference and there was a lot of people there. And she said, you know, I started to feel it here, but I'm not going home for 2 more days. And so sometimes when I'm traveling and I'm on the road, you know, and I get to a place, I want to get back to my hotel room or something, but what if I can't get there? What if I'm at a conference like this and something happens and it's bothering me and I can't get to a safe place? And again, this is just what I shared. So anytime I speak, and I do a lot of public speaking, but I still get nerves every time I speak. Both in webinars and in person. I think honestly, I probably get more nerves on a webinar than I do in person, just because of it's harder, I think, to do this because I can't see you all. I like better being in a room where I can see other people and kind of engage in that way. But what I shared with her is I still get nerves, you know, anytime I speak. And so what I do is, because I speak in all different venues and all different places, but what you'll often see right before I'm about to speak, I kind of usually will slip out of the room. I just go find a bathroom and I just shut myself in a stall and I just stand there for a minute. And again, you know, all bathrooms are going to be different, but whether I'm at a hotel, a conference center, they're going to have a bathroom. And it ensures I have a minute where I know it's just going to be me and I can just take a second, recenter, and then I go deliver the presentation. And she shared later that that actually helped her, that she said, I never thought about going and hiding in a stall just to give myself a minute. But it's something that helped her. And so that's why I'm sharing it now. How do we help them understand that they're going to be out places, they're going to be outside of their safe environment, things are going to happen, and it's going to feel very real, and things are going to go quick? How can we get them to a place or have some sort of a kind of a emergency place for them where they can get to and say, hey, just find this, get there, and just take a moment to catch your breath. Again, helping them understand that things like that will occur, but helping them at least plan for things to the extent that we're able can be helpful in that. Keeping them motivated is certainly matters. We know again, pulling in the field of public health and the literature and resources there, certainly we know that buy-in is important. Anytime we're thinking behavior change, we're thinking long-term change, the individual has to buy in. It's one of the reasons I think that work with perpetrators is difficult, because if we don't get perpetrators of abuse to buy into behavior change, they're very unlikely to do it. I'm sure they may check boxes and do what they need to do to meet court requirements or whatever's going on there. But unless they internally buy in, unless they feel that motivation that they want to change their behavior and sincerely want to, it's very hard to see any types of change. Same is true when we're thinking about survivors of abuse. Like I said, the process is unfair. It's a lengthy one. We have to find ways to keep them motivated. I think of multiple ways that victims and survivors talk about being motivated to change. I think of survivors describing, well, it was for my kids that I wanted to be better, and that's a good motivator. Again, I shared the example already of the individual who said it was my dog. If I didn't have my dog, I wouldn't have walked. I think those are good motivators. We know individuals too go into different professions as kind of a ways of wanting to make a difference. We know that particularly in human services types of fields, that the many individuals who are in these fields and working in these fields are victims themselves of abuse, of trauma, of harm. And again, they view it as, well, I want to use the harm that I experienced and I want to help others. It's good to have motivating factors such as this. Ideally, though, we want these individuals to be motivated to change because, not not just for their kids or their pets or because they want to make a difference in the lives of others, but for themselves. It really has to come from within. And it goes all back to that self-worth. Self-worth is continually attacked in an abusive relationship, and it has to be continually rebuilt in the healing process. It's withered, it's taken away, it's reduced. We have to find ways to increase it, to encourage them, to build them up. There's certainly going to be good days and bad days on the healing journey. It's not always going to go well. There will be days when they've worked to change behaviors that they see themselves going back to. They're going to be very frustrated in those days, and it's going to feel like they failed. We have to make sure that we're walking alongside them through this process, so that when those days occur, that we're there for them to encourage them and point them back in the right direction, to help them understand that again, it is an unfair journey. And it's not an easy one, but it's worth the work. We want them, it's good to want to change for others, but ideally we want them to change, at least in time, for themselves. Now, at first, it may be hard for them to see that. And at first, it may need to be that, well, I'm changing for my kids, I'm changing for my dog. It's okay, certainly, to keep the process going. But the hope is at some point they see themselves as worth it and see themselves as worth the work to change, because they deserve better. And we certainly want them to find better. We want them to find that health and hope and happiness on the other side of the hurt and harm they've experienced. Where they place their hope in this process is extremely important when we think about motivating factors. Like I said, I shared, and I apologize. I know I've coughed several times. I've got something in my throat. I'm just trying to push through and finish here. I don't have any water here close, so I appreciate your patience with that. But as they're working toward working to keep them motivated, to keep them in this process, I certainly have learned this to be an important piece as well. They're going to place hope somewhere. And it can be multiple areas and places that they put their hope. I can think of examples of athletes who have talked about experiencing hurt and harm, or having these faulty foundations, and really throwing their energy into their athletics. I don't have him pictured here, but Andy Murray, tennis star, actually, again, I talked about it recently, or the last 3 years, but the current study I'm working on is school shooters. You may or may not be aware of tennis star Andy Murray, though, actually survived a school shooting. The gunman came into the gym right after he and his classmates had left, and it was another class that was in the gym that was targeted. He had just left that. And he talks about how he threw himself into tennis to try to help him get over that emotional trauma of the near miss there at the school shooting at his school. And so we know individuals do that. We know that individuals place hope. They've experienced hurt. They've experienced harm. They place their hope in athletics and achievements. I'm not saying it's bad, but when it works, it's great. But for others, if someone is putting all of their hope in their athletic achievement, let's say it's a kid, and they don't make the football team, that's going to be a big problem for them. So what I talk about is when we're working with victim survivors, they're going to want to put their hope somewhere, and we have to make sure that we're aware that hope, that place that they put their hope, if that place fails, again, they're going to be in major risk for a downward swing. Some people, again, talk about placing their hope in their pets, but when the pet passes away, they're at risk. They may put their hope in a single counselor. And if something changes, or that counselor gets sick or hurt or dies, or something occurs there, again, it's a major blow to them. I often think, I had someone say, well, where should they put their hope? I think about the reality is that the importance of helping them find multiple places to put their hope. We want them to have hope. We want them to feel hope. We want some of it to be internal, hope in themselves, and understanding that, hey, they've been through some really hard things and they're still standing. They're still fighting. There should be hope in themselves as well. But when we put it on just one place, things can be very risky, because if that place fails, if that place falters, we can see them again have a major downward swing. We'll see individuals wanting to put hope in faith and religion. Again, it could be a job. It could be all these types of things. And finding multiple places, I think, for them to place that hope is important. It better protects against that kind of catastrophic fall if it doesn't go the way that they would have hoped for it to go. I'm not going to get into this just for sake of time, but I will share that I'll be talking about this when I'm there in Albany in person. But I look at when I'm talking Albany, I'll be talking about some of the community violence and its ties to family violence. You see Jeffrey Dahmer pictured here. I talk about Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, as well as Mark David Chapman, who's the man who shot and killed John Lennon. I talk about where they placed their hope. These were three individuals who certainly had suffered hurt and harm. And I don't see any of them being without hope. I think all of them, if things had gone differently, that we wouldn't have seen the violent outcomes that we did. But I talk about, and I'll talk about that in Albany, misplaced hope, because they placed hope in very specific places. Those places failed, and it was then that we saw the major violence starting to come out. Again, there's importance into understanding where people place their hope, and you'll see that. I want to get just this final piece, this last point here on support, because I do want to allow at least a little bit of time for questions. Certainly support is critical, and that should have been evident and obvious throughout this presentation, I hope. It's a journey that each survivor, healing is a journey each survivor must make themselves, but it's not one that they have to make alone. Yes, they're the ones that has to choose the journey. Yes, ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to be walking through it, but it doesn't mean they have to walk alone. We want it to be their journey. The abuse was about the abuser. These abusive environments they live in are centered on the abuser. Healing is theirs. Healing is their process. We don't take it from them. It's going to look different. That's why I'm just sharing concepts. I'm just trying to share concepts and ideas today, because each victim's path is going to look a little different, and then their path to finding healing will look different. Helping them find that is important. We allow it to stay theirs. It needs to be theirs, but they also need to not feel that they're alone in this process. When I think of support, I think of it from both ways. We have to limit negative influence and increase positive, supportive ones. I probably won't get too much into this again because I'm going to share it more in my in-person talk, and I'm running out of time. But we certainly know when people are in emotional distress, they can be very susceptible to outside influence. It's something else I talk about again in my school shooter work. Often when we think about school shootings, we think about violent video games, violent books, violent movies, that individuals, often we see these types of things blamed for violent outcomes. I don't think that kids play violent video games and that's why violence occurs. What I think often, what I describe is, when individuals are hurting, when they haven't found healing, when they may not even think that healing is possible or understand their hurt yet, they are very susceptible to outside influence. And again, I think of a lot of these kids who are experiencing hurt and harm. Is it because they witness or watch or see these violent things that they go on to do violent things themselves? No, it's not the only reason, but it doesn't help. Again, when they're hurting, when they're experiencing harm, what they put in matters. And it's another key aspect when we're helping these individuals to heal. When they're in this distress, when they're starting to work through it, I call it a delicate dance, and we have to ensure that at least to the extent that they're able, that the things they're watching, the things they're reading, that are going to lead them to a life of less stress, toward peace, away toward health, away from harm, away from hurt. Again, helping them with that, I think, is an important piece of the process that we don't as often talk about. It's also important who's in the boat with them. When individuals are in these streams and we're trying to get them to safety, to the shore, if they've got friends or contacts who are in that boat with them, pushing them toward that violent outcome, again, that is a relationship that is jeopardizing their health outcome. Anytime victims and survivors make healthier choices, they are moving away from unhealthy choices, and they're going to leave people there as well, unfortunately. There's always going to be relationship casualties as individuals move toward health and happiness and better choices. Again, people often connected to those unhealthy choices are going to stay there, and they're going to try to pull the victim back there. So if we're talking about alcohol abuse, drug use, individuals who they engage in those activities with aren't going to understand why there's this sudden change, and they're going to want to try to encourage them to go back often to those types of behaviors. So we have to help, to the extent that we're able, help encourage to protect them from outside influences such as media that can be difficult or harmful to them. There also will be individuals who will be a major obstruction to the healing process, trying to pull them back toward those unhealthy behaviors that we have to help them with. In the field of domestic violence, we sometimes refer to individuals who unwittingly further the harm of the perpetrator as flying monkeys. These are individuals who will often come into play too, and that we have to prepare victims to face, and survivors as well. This idea that they'll come and say, well, you're exaggerating. It can't be that bad. You're being mean. They wouldn't do that. They couldn't do it. They didn't do it. You're the problem. These people are going to come out of the woodwork often, and we have to prepare the survivor who's working toward healing that these people will come, and we have to make sure that they're ready to handle that appropriately. If it's let's say it's a child whose mother was the abuser, then they'll have individuals come up to them and say, well, at least you had a mother. I never had one. Or even if your mom was abusive, she's the only mom you've got. They'll say things like that that are not helpful in the healing process. It's very difficult for individuals to separate from biological relatives. For that reason, they're often will be pushed and forced and pressured by others who have little knowledge of the situation. And they'll be made to feel guilty for trying to separate from that. But again, they are moving toward health and happiness, and we have to ensure that they understand that this will happen. And here's how we're going to deal with it. It's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but it's coming, and helping them to prepare for it can better, again, keep it from being as influential. It's still going to hurt. It's always going to bother them when they have individuals who say those things to them, but helping them prepare for it is an important part of the healing process. It's a bad joke, but like I said, I have 2 kids. I do have my dad joke card, so I can make bad jokes like this one. But we have to encourage survivors. Sometimes they're going to have to cut ties. There's just going to have to be some relationships that are going to have to go as they move toward healthy. It's just, again, not what they want, and it's not that they're, they would rather those individuals come with them and follow them to health and happiness. But the reality is sometimes it's just not going to be possible. I just want to share this last piece here now on the positive side of support. Like I said, I have some slides in here. Some of these things I'm going to fold into my presentation when I'm there in person. But the last part I want to end on is the positive side. Again, an important part of the support. So support, we think of reducing negative influence and increasing positive influence. When we think about positive influence, many survivors will tell you that they want to find it at church. I can think of multiple studies who have asked victims of domestic violence or partner abuse in particular, and they have said if they were going to disclose the abuse to anyone in the community, they wanted it to be a faith-based organization. There is such huge opportunity here. This is one of the groups I've more recently started to work more with. I'm giving a keynote at a gala in Texas for a faith-based group, speaking at another faith-based conference here coming up soon, doing a lot more work with these groups because there is such huge potential here. So many survivors of abuse want to find help from these groups. And I think sometimes the faith-based groups might overthink what's being asked for from them, because what survivors need from them is support. They need help, and making sure that faith-based groups are attaching survivors to the right organizations like law enforcement, like child services, like those who are trained to help those other pieces. But from the faith-based organization themselves, what they really need is support. They need help. They need encouragement. They don't need judgment. They don't need someone to try to decide what happened or did it really happen when they're talking about matters in the home. They just need help and support. So it's certainly something I'm trying to work with faith-based groups as we work toward that goal. You'll see me skip those just for sake of time. Last piece I want to wrap up here in these last few slides. Like I said, I'm going to be real close on time. I knew that was going to be the case. I'll allow time at least hopefully for a couple questions, and I'll stick around, but just assuming some of you will have to go. Please email me. I'll share that at the end if you have questions and don't get to ask them today, and I can respond as I'm able. The pet piece of support, though, is another important one. When we think of a positive influence, I wrote my first book on the pet piece, and it's such a critical component of this. Many humans have been hurt and harmed so badly by other humans, they just simply don't trust humans, but they will cling more tightly to a companion animal. They haven't been burned by dogs or cats. They will cling tightly to them. And these pets can be an important part of that healing process when they're permitted to be a part of it. We know pets can provide many things for humans, really, whether they're suffering abusive relationships or not, but certainly individuals who have suffered abuse at the hands of humans and hands of family members, pets can be a critical source of help and support through the healing process, and help them even long after that process. For many, I can think of many victims who say their first disclosure of their abuse was to their pet. These pets are often, again, many of them are very important in the lives of these individuals. We have to ensure that we understand that and we acknowledge it. That if they have a pet, particularly even if it's a child or an adult, it could be very important to them. We certainly don't want to minimize the importance of the relationship with their pet, because it could be very important. And again, like you said, if you've been harmed by humans, you're going to struggle to trust them. You may cling more tightly to companion animals. We know there's evidence in other areas too of pets providing support. We think of in hospitals, you see pets often able to provide at least some level of comfort to individuals suffering severe illness and their families. We know in the courtroom that dogs can have a calming influence on children as they're providing difficult testimony. And we know even from the earliest dates of recorded history, this is from the mummified ashes of a small dog and a child. The child clutching a small dog, mummified remains of after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii. Even in the earliest stages and dates of recorded disaster history, we see children clinging to their pets, and we know that it's true, not just then, but now as well. I talk about school shootings. One of the go-to responses in the U.S. right now to a school shooting is they bring in teams of therapy dogs to help the kids who are obviously working and dealing through unspeakable distress and difficulty there. And what often happens, you can see the Parkland dogs have their own yearbook page now. Usually the dogs come in and they become a permanent fixture. It's very hard to get them back out. The kids quickly become attached. They provide comfort and support, and they become a common fixture there. One of the things that I'm going to be pushing in my shooter study that I'll hopefully have out next year or later this year is if we know pets can help kids on the other side of the trauma and harm, what if we have teams of therapy dogs in the school before a shooting? Might we be able to reach the student who's in distress, and maybe they find help from the therapy dog and they no longer bring the gun to school and the shooting doesn't occur. But we know that on the other side of school shootings that they certainly provide support and help individuals who are dealing with unspeakable trauma. There's science to support it. We know studies have shown for children, for married partners, and for women in the U.S. that a dog can be a great buffer of stress. For women, it was dog better buffer than their best friend. For married partner, dog better buffer than their partner. For child, dog sometimes better buffer than their parent. So again, we know pets can provide help and comfort through this process. When I go back and I think about just as I close here, again, it's a long process. We haven't had much time to get to really to wrestle with it today. I tried to get as much as I could in the time we have. And it's complex in one sense in that it's a process, but there's also simple concepts that I think that if we focus on those areas, we tailor and customize for the survivor, what do these pieces look like for them? Again, we can help them in this process, help them ensure that, or help them better feel that they're not alone. When we look at survivors, particularly of child emotional maltreatment, we see that they say the one thing that was most instrumental to their surviving the abuse and harm was having one person, one being, show unconditional positive regard. Again, the healing process is long and it's often involved, but it starts there. Individuals never minimize the influence or impact that you may have in the life of an individual who's experiencing these things by simply showing up, by simply being there. Now they're going to need more. It's not going to fix everything, but it's a great starting point for them. Again, when I think about the perpetrators of extreme mass violence and these types of things, they never had anyone do that for them. When I talk about those individuals, I talk about not only the presence of bad, but the absence of good in their lives. And the same is true when we think about other individuals as well. Just having one person show unconditional positive regard really is what can be all the difference for some of these victims and later survivors as they work toward healing. I say as such, one safe place. Many of you are probably a safe place now for someone, and it's important. Don't ever minimize it, even if it's frustrating, if it feels like, well, the person just went back, or it doesn't, they're still unharmed. I can't get them to safety. Don't minimize what you're doing, and certainly don't stop what you're doing, because having that one safe place matters. I can think of one victim who said, talked about just great difficulty in childhood, and they said, you know what? It was my cow. I would get off the school bus and I would run to my cow in the barn and I would tell the cow everything that I experienced, and that cow is what got me through. I've shared that story, and now I just had someone recently come up to me again, and I think I don't remember what state I was in, but said, hey, I can't believe it. There's another cow person. She said, because my friends have always made fun of me because I always told them it was my cow that got me through as well. And so again, I say if a cow can do it, then certainly we can do it. It's just showing up. This is where it starts. Again, it's not oversimplifying the process, but it starts with having one person show that unconditional positive regard. It allows them to see that, hey, the hurt and harm I'm experiencing from other people that I should be able to trust doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to be what I expect to happen for the rest of my life. There are individuals who care about me. And again, over time, that can have certainly a lasting impact on these individuals. The work to heal is hard, but it's important. And it best ensures that these cycles are broken and that hurt, harm, and pain isn't passed on to the future generations. Again, if you have interest in my book, I talked about a lot of the concepts from it, but it's available on Amazon as an ebook or a paperback. You can find it there. And then here's my contact info. You can feel free to email me, or you can check out my website. It has all the different talks that I give, and as well as all of my studies. Most of my studies, I think, if not all, are available for free download on my website there. But again, like I said, I know we're right on time. I wanted to fill as much in as I could, but certainly email me if you have questions. I may not be able to get to it today, but I will get to it as soon as I can. But thank you again so much for your time and the opportunity to speak with you today.
Andrew, we really appreciate it. Only a few weeks away. We'll see you in person. Thank you to everyone who was able to make it for us today's webinar as well. And stay tuned. You'll get an email follow up with details with the recording link, access to Andrew's slides, and join us if you can at our next virtual webinar before the conference. So we appreciate everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Blake.
Bye.